Hey, Bill. Hey, Ralph. Welcome to this Zoom conversation, not to be confused with the LinkedIn Live. That was a fun experiment and a good reminder of the possibilities that exist and the need to learn and iterate and adapt. So here we are. We might be welcoming other folks who are going with our plan B, but otherwise it's just us for a quiet little fireside chat. Do you want to just quickly say hello and whatever's on your mind in terms of mindset you're coming in with, and then I'll frame us up in terms of what's going on here. Ralph, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. And I just let Veronica in, so she's our first witness, a live witness. Hello, Veronica.
Hi, good morning. It's only because
Nice
I
that
woke
you're.
up late and I was afraid that I was like late there. And then I was like telling you guys like, no, you're live. And then I hadn't noticed that it said previously live. And I'm like, oh my God, it's too early for me.
Yeah. We had our technical glitches, but now you're coming in right at the right moment. So
Perfect.
yeah, Lorraine was asking me just some first thoughts. For me, it's Friday evening. It's the last thing that I'm going to do on my Friday workday. So I'm happy to see this as a sort of like a fireside chat that goes that helps me to emerge into the weekend. And yeah, that's the attitude I'm coming with to this meeting.
Awesome. How about you, Bill?
Yeah, I mean, I guess this is a conversation that in some ways has been a long time coming because from the very get-go, when I saw your work, Lorraine, on materiality, I just knew that there it is both sort of overlaps with the work that we're doing on materiality, and it's distinct. So I think it's very worth having a conversation where at least we understand what's similar and what's distinct about it. I think that the common thread that I can just say in general is that all of the materiality that the three of us and probably those who are either here now or watching in the future think that the predominant approaches to materiality are just utterly broken. And so I guess I'm agnostic. I don't, if people want to use Lorraine's materiality, I'm a huge, like, I support that 100%. If they want to use our version of context-based materiality or triple materiality, great. If there's some sort of fusion of that emerges in the future, great. Just so long as we all agree that the predominant approaches to materiality are not going to get us where we want to go.
Love it. Thanks, Bill and Ralph. And yeah, I'll maybe just set us up a little bit more. And then as we do have a few folks joining, and I saw a little bit of chatter on LinkedIn and people trying to find their way in, so we may see others coming. We'll just roll with it and welcome people as they come. And I'll maybe underscore and then add a little bit to what Bill and Ralph, you were sharing. I guess where I'm coming from is a place of play, really, a place to experiment and unhook from what we always thought was true or what we always hoped might work. And that's really from my own experience of really hoping that materiality, as we'd been trained to do it all these years in mainstream ESG, hoping it would work, hoping if we just tried a little harder, just got a little more buttoned down, just had a little more senior endorsement, if we just got it a little more, we'd get it right. And then realizing it only took me 20 years to realize, no, we're still not getting it more right. And thank you to those who are coming in and finding the door. Again, apologies for the tech. Maybe that's the last time we'll mention the tech as we're just officially jumping in and rolling with the conversation. And I'll frame what got me here in this moment with you now. It's an awareness that there's a real appetite, I would say a growing, both financialized and time committed appetite to get sustainability right, to not abandon everything, to not burn it all down, but an equally growing awareness that what got us here ain't going to get us where we need to go. And that's a paradox. It's profound commitment and will, but it's also massive barriers and blind spots and sort of old habits and trainings. So what gives me great delight to connect with Bill and Ralph about, and I'll maybe end this monologue with a direct question to Bill and Ralph. What gives me such delight is that I think of you two as the doers of the homework. Like for years, you have been mostly quietly. You're very transparent, you're very willing to share, but you don't make a lot of noises. You don't like put on a lot of fancy shoes and makeup and go to the ball. You just get the work done. And you provide so much data, so much context, so many connections for so many of us. And I love that partly just because it's really generous and helpful. But I also love it because I see so much connection with the conclusions that I and many others have been coming to, which is we need to be collapse aware. We need to look at real transformation and radical transparency. Otherwise, it's worse than just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. So I feel a real kinship. Where I still feel a hunger is to see examples of transformation happening through transparency. I think this is first and foremost a transparency conversation. We know there's lots of other elements to sustainability, but I think we're largely coming in here with the transparency disclosure lens. And I'm really keen to hear where you, Bill and Ralph, are seeing examples where something is changing. Like actual social and or ecological impacts are changing because of what we're doing. And I'll maybe put it to Bill and Ralph, and then I'll stop chatting. And I will encourage anyone joining, feel free to put your own questions, ideas, things that are on your mind into the chat, and we'll come to them and open things up best we can.
Yeah.
If I stop, over to Bill and Ralph.
Maybe I'll start, Bill. And I don't want to sound too disappointing, but there's one caveat that we have to all look at. When I worked at GRI, starting as a European industry expert still with Siemens in 1998, and then as a staff member from 2002 onwards, the expectation was always change will not happen individually. It is a systemic and economic system change that needs to be achieved. So the first vision statement of GRI was very much to, like saying like sunlight is the best disinfectant. Something like, well, we all need to do our part, but transformation will only happen if we all do it. And we in our 3.0, we have always acknowledged that micro-macro link, because that's also how GRI has then come up with the sustainability context principle. And I had the honor to lead the work streams on G2 and G3 in order to arrange for that understanding that it needs the contribution of the individual organizations to then reach transformation on the macro level. Because only then, if we reach that on the macro level, it allows for level playing field changes in industries, and only then everybody will do their part. What we have to say today that failed. It's very clear that failed. And it failed because out of many reasons. And I only want to remember or let people remind that in GRI G3 in 2006, we had, from my perspective, and I'm still proud of that version of the GRI guidelines, I think we had everything in place. We had a clear inside out and outside in perspective to risk, to strategy, to whatever companies needed to do. And yeah, thank you, Bill. And yeah, here's what GRI G3 said. And there are actually, I think there are two slides that we also have in our training material, and this is one where it very clearly says, there is the inside-out perspective, there's the outside-in perspective, and on another slide, it was very clearly saying there are materiality thresholds and there are sustainability thresholds. And here's the point. This is why the sustainability context principle did exist. There we go. This is what that slide shows, making people understand we have materiality thresholds and sustainability thresholds. The sustainability thresholds came in through the sustainability context principle. So you have the sustainability context principle, the inside out and the outside in view. And this is what we today call triple materiality. But that was already there in 2006. And then what happened? You know, the sustainability context principle, I say that all the time, is the only connection of the GRI and the GRI guidelines, and still today, to sustainability. Without the sustainability context principle, it's just an efficiency measurement standard on topics that are deemed to have a role to play in sustainability. But it says nothing about sustainability without that link to sustainability context. And that sustainability context link was very clearly saying you need to have that micro-macro perspective, otherwise we won't achieve transformation. And why am I saying that this failed? Just very simply because companies did not adhere to that logic.
Mm-hmm.
And then since then, I think, and we at R3.0, we've actually wrote a brochure called The Lost Decade about all of that. We're just having seen a downward spiral ever since. And unfortunately, I have to say that the regulatory approaches with the ESRS and the ISSB only made things worse. And what we're now seeing with the political climate that we're having right now, I am predicting an implosion.
Mm-hmm.
This is where it got us. And this is the denial since 2006. We had everything in place, we screwed up.
But I want to build on that because yes, everything that Ralph said is the case, and I think in particular what he said there, the theory of change was that companies would take accountability for their actions, that the transparency theory of change was tied in with that transparency would trigger a kind of self-accountability mechanism that you know, because that, but I think that what happened in reality is that the power, the hegemonic power of our capitalist economic system was too powerful for that theory of change, for that transparency to overcome the power to obfuscate. So essentially what the sustainability reporting field became was not a sustainability reporting field, but a sustainability obfuscation field. And so really what's been happening since 2011, really, when GRI, I'll just go to the next slide, GRI, this was sort of the fatal flaw where GRI took their beautiful materiality matrix, which if you look on the red here on the left is the version from 2006 in G3, where you've got a significance of economic, environmental, and social impacts. So that's the impact of the company on the world, on the horizontal axis. In 2011, GRI slipped this in without any explanation of why it did it. And it shifted from essentially an altruistic approach where one is concerned about one's fellow human beings, about the world, about other than self, and replaced it with a purely narcissistic approach, which is significance to the organization, significance to myself, in other words. And so that essentially opened the floodgates for companies to not be concerned about sustainability reporting that holds themselves accountable. It is purely about, in fact, in the most efficient way, avoiding that. And so here's how I want to get, and we can share a little bit more about sort of context-based materiality and triple materiality. Most of the people on the call actually know that well enough that we may not need it, but I know we're recording as well. So we can backfill what the technicalities of that are. But I guess just building off what we've said so far, this is what I think is so beautiful about Lorraine's materiality approach, is that it's not taking an internal accountability, it's taking an external accountability perspective. It's basically saying, well, here, let's take what you, company A or company B or company C, is saying about yourself, and let's filter it through our bullshitometer. And let's see what comes out on the other side. And lo and behold, it's all bullshit. When we actually compare it to what the real world would need, what real materiality would be, we don't see the same thing that you're telling us. And so I think that's, there are many things that I think are beautiful about Lorraine's materiality, but I think that is the most important element of it. And if that were to scale up, if we had broad scale external accountability on companies, then that could reinvigorate our theory of change.
Thanks, Bill and Ralph. I'm gonna briefly respond, and then I'd love to see if there are specific questions or ideas or contributions from folks signing in, because as you note, the Brain Trust on here is probably painfully familiar with a lot of what we're talking about. I want to respond by sharing. I'm sort of torn in a few directions, to be candid. A little piece of me wants to show you lots of cool things, and then a bigger piece of me is like, do not touch the tech. So I'm not going to, but I just dropped a link in there that takes you to my website, and you can download Materiality, and I would be delighted to show you things in a calmer moment. I think instead I want to just say what has been a resounding conclusion for me. This is a little bit uncomfortable, but I think you all are here because you're open to seeing things differently. It's in some ways satisfying to point out the bullshit, like to say, hey, just gonna ask you to mute. Yeah, thank you. And also iPhone Alex, if you can turn your name into a name, that'd be cool. I'm guessing your name is Alex. Yeah, great to see you. And we're just riffing a bit, and when folks have direct questions, etc., we'll rope you all in. So there's some satisfaction, like a little bit like scratching an itch in saying, hey, that's weird. I followed that money and it didn't really add up. Hey, that's odd. You said this, like one of my itchiest scratches as an example of what I mean is looking at plastics waste reduction. And I've written a lot about this, if I can make a point of putting the link in here, but let me get really tangible about what I mean. A decade ago, lots of consumer products companies were talking about waste reduction, talking about plastic. These are not new issues. As Bill just reminded us, in 2006, we had all of this information and more, and we've had it for decades, right? This is not new. So, but a decade ago, I looked at consumer products. Let me back up. I did a benchmarking of consumer products companies, looking at their decade ago disclosures to more recently. I picked 5: Nestle, P&G, Danone, Coca-Cola, and I think Pepsi. I just did it because I was trying to figure out, like, wait, what are they saying? Something feels a little weird. And an example would be P&G 10 years ago was saying, I think genuinely, look, we see a problem here and we need to make the problem smaller. And the way you make the plastic problem smaller, according to us, and I think the data was from 2012-ish, is we have less plastic. And so we as a company are committing to putting less plastic into the marketplace. And I forget the exact stat, but it was an absolute number. It was like, right now it's this big, it's gonna get this big, because we think that's what we need to do. We could nitpick, did we like how they were gonna do it, or do we believe them? But at the very least, the intention suggested it was gonna go like this. When you look a couple reports later, you see the language start to slide and slip and shift. And it stops being we're going to make less plastic, and it starts being we're going to make less waste. We're going to make more recyclable plastic. We're going to make more plastic from recycled. And for me, P&G was the best in class. The earlier folks, or the other folks, were a little more vague, like, yeah, we think it's an issue. We're looking at it. We're looking at, I mean, some of the goals were things like a 25% increase in non-virgin material in our single-use plastic waste, right? So no reduction in the problem. So I say that to say, actually looking, just like you just showed us Bill, that like the language was there and then they switched it. And there's a kind of satisfaction in that. Like, I'm not crazy. There is a problem. We know it. And we're messing with ourselves. We're being kind of collectively gaslit. But here's the really awkward part is when I recognize that, that satisfaction lasts a nanosecond. And then it's chased by shit. Like this is a collective norm that is so ensconced in how we're educated, how we're incentivized, how we're paid, rewarded, and those things there's variations on incentives, pay, and reward. And there's so much noise you have to break through to even get to the, hey, wait a second, itch scratching, that most people never make it there. They're worn down. They're paying mortgages. They're worried about their kids' anxiety levels. They're dealing with life.
Well,
And there's nothing pushing us to say, I scratched the itch, but I don't want to be itchy anymore. So for me, materiality is the materiality I play with and spell with reality. It actually abandons sustainability tools and frameworks. And it says, like it kind of pretends to not abandon them. It's like, yeah, we got those tools, we got those frameworks. But then it's like, okay, and also here's the point. Your business model is shitty. And unless it is rewired, it won't get better. Can we talk about that? What would that look like? What would it really look like to serve life? And that means different things to different people. So I just want to underscore my moment now is, can we get really real about what needs to change, even though it's really hard, fundamental, confusing, and massive? Because without that, it's another lost decade. I'll end my sermon. I'm seeing some chatter, and Bill, it looks like you're unmuted and want to weigh in. Go for it.
Yeah, no, Lorraine, I think that what I mean, I don't know if you've noticed or not, but just south of you, there's a country that I live in where some of what you've been mentioning is relevant, might even say material, which is that I think that what we're seeing in a political landscape of essentially the normalization of defactualizing life. That essentially one can make an assertion, and that assertion carries weight no matter how transparently ridiculous it is. So I think that that trend has been happening on a macro basis, at a societal level basis, along the same timeline that it was being enacted in the corporate sustainability realm. And so I think those of us who have been calling bullshit for, and increasingly loudly and increasingly with less and less polite language over this last decade or more, I get this sort of like, it's satisfying to call the bullshit, but how effective is it? I mean, Ralph and I have come to the determination that it is not effective enough for us to spend our time in this field in the way that we had. We're now using what I would call a roundabout mechanism, which is through place-based engagement, which is like, well, okay, there will be companies and investors operating in places, but that's the way to get to them. And so I think that the norms aspect of things, I think, is fundamentally important. And those of you on this call have probably followed our deep dive into social norms and social tipping points and things like that. Even those are not, there's no guarantee that there's not like a formula that you can follow for triggering a social tipping point, other than, I think, there's an aspect of claiming agency. So that's, again, this is another thing that I think is beautiful about Lorraine's work. And I think our approach to materiality, I would also say, is sort of beautiful in that sense, is that it is sort of claiming agency to assert a more realistic picture, knowing that's a claim that has evidence and analytical backing to it. Plus, it's as you pointed out, Lorraine, it's more fun. So I think that there's real commonality on that side, and I can't speak to the how effective this will ultimately be, but I can say that if one is looking at what one can do with one's time, spending time doing things that are authentic, to use the language that the UN, in our collaboration with them, UNRIS, the United Nations Research Institute for Social Development, they essentially, by saying this is authentic sustainability, they were not so subtly saying everything else is inauthentic sustainability. And I'll end, I know I see Ralph is off mute. I'll end just by one thing, that the whole thing that you started this out with, Lorraine, of the, looking back on 10 years, that's one of the things that Peter Utting, who was a deputy director with UNRIS for many years, and he wrote sort of one of the key reports. If you get a chance to look at the Utting O'Neill report in the Sustainable Development Performance Indicators package, one of the things they point out is companies report their work on a year-by-year basis, and essentially nobody does that work of going back and saying like, hey, wait a second, last year you said this. And the companies, and we, all three of us, have participated in making the sausage and been present when companies make these decisions to sweep things under the rug. And so it's sort of like it's like an open secret, I guess. And so the SDPI indicators that UNRWA put out, one of the things is that you have to have a 5-year performance time series, and maybe that's not even enough. Maybe it should be a 10-year time series, but at least that problem is being acknowledged by the SDPI. So I'll end my rant there.
Yeah, I can jump in with a couple of other perspectives. And Lorraine, your approach by just being the outside voice to the description that comes from inside of the organization is in some way equal to what the UN SDPI indicators do by adding thresholds and allocations. It just gives a science and ethical based question of, hey, when is good enough, and how far are you away from that? So there's a similarity, I think, there. And on the other side, I also fully acknowledge that what this shows is the immense level of unsustainability of all of these organizations. And why I understand that this is not a nice message, all of these organizations that write these so-called sustainability reports, I once asked them to write an unsustainability report, really, acknowledge that they all have the same problem. And that has to do with the fact that the simple logic of a corporation is potentially, by definition, an unsustainable one. Maybe we just need to come to the point to understand that the logic of a corporation cannot produce sustainability. And maybe it's good to just simply start to acknowledge that. Because I don't know of any organization in the corporate world with a board and shareholders and all of that is sustainable. There is none. So yeah, maybe we find a new level playing field by accepting that there is organized unsustainability. So that's one thing. And I think that recognition also brought me and Bill and others to the point, well, maybe we've all chosen the wrong unit of measurement. Maybe it's not the corporation. And we know from our history of conferences, we had John Fullerton in 2015, who was already talking about, well, what about the bioregion as the unit of measurement? And with the ongoing failure of the concept of sustainability reporting in corporates, this nagged in our heads more and more and more. And we were thinking, well, He's probably right. And we also, due to the ongoing collapse, which we also realized and went through our morning journeys, let's say from 2018 onwards, we realized place-based, bioregionally based, regionally based might be the only important unit of measurement. And also just the concept that in a place-based community, the direct visibility of the negative impact is much more clear. Think about, I worked in a multinational company, many of us did. How far away are these problems from our headquarters? And how far are they just talked down on the way to the headquarters? And we find all sorts of reasons why we think, oh, because it's 8,000 kilometers away, it's not material. Well, it is. And, just a very, very recent case that I've seen, which underscores, I think, that the concept of corporate sustainability is just a failed one. Maersk, for example, just issued the first CSRD report. And, there were critics who say, oh, this is not really, this should be better and this should be better. And I was just commenting, well, sorry to say, but Maersk has just sold a lot of their oil tankers to support the shadow fleet of Russian oil. Well, one of those topics is enough for me to ruin the complete reputation of whatever the corporate department does in sustainability. Sorry, this is so fucked up. This cannot be. And then Maersk comes out with a report and says, oh, we pride ourselves with our first CSRD report. Fuck you. Honestly, how on earth? How on earth? So here we are. And this is what we are seeing. Corporate sustainability is a failed concept. Place-based sustainability is probably the only survival mode in there. And then this fits so well to bioregionalism as the only survival pattern that we as humans ever had since 10,000 years. It has just been totally thrown under the bus by economics, by neoliberalism, and the idea that economics is above nature and science and the law. So from that perspective, I think this is, in emotional words, how we come to the conclusion that context-based sustainability will survive, but it will only survive in a bioregional and place-based mode.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Ralph. I feel you. Like, I really feel that. And that there's room for a lot more emotion on this stuff because it's big and dark. If I may, I'd like to offer a little twig of what instead. And I'm seeing some good questions and comments in the chat, so please keep it coming. And if anybody wants to come off mute, just throw your hand up and we're happy to unmute and give you the floor. I want to tell you the two things I do to navigate that set of emotions. And why I want to tell them to is because I do think there's a lot of room to talk about this stuff, like to let it hang out, to be angry, frustrated, confused, helpless, like all the things. And to call failure out and notice what's really not working. I fully align with that series of expressions. And I think we come here now and we know each other through the context of making change and improving. And I don't have the magical future wand, but I do have two things that I come back to again and again that pull me up and push me forward. One is actively seeking out existing examples that make more sense. And the bioregional zone, I think, is a very warm zone for existing, already happening now. We might not call it a business model or a business, but that's because we're like, oh, business is broken. Let's find one that's fixed. But as soon as we drop that and say, no, no, it's not business broken. We need to fix it. It's we meet our needs and wants through various ways. And there's various ways we could do that that could be very different than what we do now. Okay, so stop looking for a new business model and start looking for better norms. What do we find? And we find they're all around us. My angry self wants to run down the thread of how come they keep getting oppressed, stamped out, and marginalized by modern industry? It's like, okay, hang on, leave that for a second. We have models. We have existing seeds, literally seeds, heritage seeds, and people who know how to grow them, and metaphorical seeds, people who know how to work cross generation, cross culture, cross sector, work hard, have fun. You know, we do know how to do this. And one of the things I don't see enough of that maybe in myself, and so I'll just project it outward, is practicing those things, going to those people and doing those things right there on the ground and just being in it. That one practice is already very, very powerful. And I could say more about how I aim to practice that. That's the stuff that, by the way, I think we know this, but I'll name it, is much less visible in social media. It isn't always Instagrammable. It isn't always in a report. It doesn't have metrics. To your point, Sarah, that I see in the chat, there isn't one metric, right? There's so many different ways that those successes express. And that's the beauty of it. And there's no need to package it. Sometimes it's nice if we can message it or share it or do something with it. But often it's just, yeah, we just let that grow. That's the good stuff. The second practice that I increasingly go to, and I'll give you a concrete example from a meeting I participated in. I now live rurally. I've mostly lived in big cities. And in the last year, I've made a switch to a very rural community. And I have the good fortune to connect with a number of farmers of different scales and production models. And there's a real shift happening. We talk about the problem south of the border. So I'm in Canada, lots of interesting dynamics in the US. Honestly, a lot of the patterns are the same here. The names are different, the programs are different, but many similar patterns, one of which is a lot of land grabbing for big ag. And that's happening all around. And so there's real concern about bee die-off, about soil loss, blah, blah, blah. So this second practice is genuinely asking non-humans, what else? What can we do? So how does that show up in real life? Because I do kind of just walk around in real life. A lot of the dialogue was about how do we ban glyphosate? How do we encourage cash croppers to change their practices? A bunch of very understandable, sort of logical, this looks like the problem. So if we could just fix the problem, we could move on. But if you center non-humans who don't have economic models, right? Who don't have a profit motive, who don't have a clue what we're thinking or doing, they just go about their days. And in particular, my favorite to check in with is migratory birds. If you were to ask migratory birds what they would do about the problem of dangerous ag inputs in monocropping, how do we change that? I believe, I don't really know, but my sense when I kind of center them and their way and how they do things is they just say, why are you monocropping? Nature never monocropped. Nature never separated raising plants from raising animals, and certainly never just had one plant. That's cuckoo. You can't fix that. Why are you trying? Why are you arguing with each other about which poison should be banned and which one should be allowed? That's a silly conversation. Here's what we know works, you know, and then you realize we've grounded the debate in what we're allowed to argue about. But if we widen the lens and ask more than humans who just have such common sense, how would you guys handle this? At least in the community dialogue space, it opens up a lot of possibility. And it was a really cool conversation with farmers. We're just brainstorming and sparring. And then bringing it into the corporate context, that's where with Materiality, the process that I do, where I try to put reality into it, the last step, there's 3. The third one is to invite, well, what would an economy that serves life look like? and not just ask people who know this sector very well, they're good people to talk to, but what happens if we ask a wider biospheric perspective with a bioregional perspective, with a biological perspective, what could that look like? So I just want to invite those two practices to both go into the context where things work well, whether you call it a working business model or not, just go where it works well, spend time there and practice. And invite more than human perspective to really widen the lens with common sense. Those immediately lift me to a much happier place, even though I don't have the answer for how to jam them into corporate practice. They give me a lot of guidance. So I just thought I'd put that out. I want to check and see if there are hands of anybody who wants to jump in. I see lots of chatter. I'm not keeping up with it all, but does anybody want to unmute? And by the way, I'm also aware we're going to lose Ralph in 6 minutes, 10-ish minutes. So just putting that out there. I'll stop talking and see who starts.
I'm getting a signal that I can stay a little bit longer.
Oh, cool. And Carrie, we'll tee you up next. Do you want to say a few words, Ralph, or should we give Carrie the floor?
Let's give Carrie the floor. I think Bill and I spoke enough.
Well, first of all, thank you. This is an unexpectedly richer than I could have imagined conversation, and as always, appreciating your transparency. And this is the conversation I think many of us want to be having, and so grateful. But as I said in the comments, I think Bill and Ralph know that I'm engaged in bioregioning, just beginning that exercise, and I've been working on the Global Regenerative Finance Initiative for the past few years, trying to get at the heart of, the mechanics of finance, because I worry that, the biofi or the bioregional financing conversations that we're all in, we could, it's nope, without much thought, we're just going to bring these same challenges into that context. And so I want to be, I think directionally bioregioning is I think we're in agreement that that's where we're all headed. And I want to remain vigilant and engaged with all of you and the butterflies and the migratory birds in conversation around how do we have the flows going to the right places in the new ways that we know we need them to do, because otherwise it's just like more incrementalism, and it's not going to get us where we need to go. And so Bill and Ralph, and Lorraine too, I'm teeing you up for the work you're doing around carrying capacity and planetary boundaries and context-based sustainability. We got to embed that stuff.
Thank you, Carrie. I'm really glad you're here. I know you've been working on the regenerative finance work for quite a while, so it's great to see you here. I wonder if you have, and no worries if you don't, it's a high expectation, but do you have a particular ask, or let me say back what I'm hearing and agreeing with, which is we have to be really careful that yet another really amazing idea doesn't get co-opted into the grind and turned into another branding tool for selling more crap. And thoughts or things you're seeing working well that help us improve versus just loop back around.
Well, I hear your call, Lorraine. I'm so attuned to the fact that we need better examples, and we don't have them. And I think part of the reason we don't have them is because we haven't I don't think we've seen examples of regenerative finance yet. I don't think we know what it is. I don't think we've done the fundamental work to actually redesign it. I think that's the work at hand, and that's what I hope we can all continue to do together. There are definitely directionally things that are happening that are points of light that like indicate that there's hope and there's promise, and that there's so much amazing work being done by powerless, unseen regenerative practitioners all over the globe who are not recognized by our movement. So that's a place to look and to start documenting better and redesigning the fundamental mechanics of finance to internalize the externalities is where we need to go next. And I would love to engage in that exercise with all of you. But also at the corporate level, until we read, I thought that one of one of the points of to intervene in the system is to redesign the rules of the SEC. I mean, people tried, our friends at B Lab and B Corp tried redesigning the corporate form and, gesturally correct, but doesn't still go far enough. So governance, redesigning governance, I mean, all of it needs to be redesigned, I guess. That's really but I wish I could serve up better examples, but we are guilty of in all of us here, I think we're all complicit. We need to pay attention to the fact that we are not a diverse enough movement. And we are not noticing the work that's happening on the ground well enough.
Yeah, I think that's a fair call out. I'm going to offer a recharacterization, if I may, while agreeing. And I think there's a thousand ways to look at this. I'll draw on the conversation with the farmers last night, actually. One of whom I know quite well. I've known him for years. I've been on his farm, totally regenerative. Like the world is just a better place with what he's doing. Amazing, deeply committed, exhausted, underfunded, drawing down on his retirement savings just to make basic ends meet. And it was really, so there's a mix of people. There was actual farmers, producers living on the land, producing things, some much bigger and more commercialized, some more small scale. And then there's folks, I'd say, like me, as in concerned citizens, not actively producing from the land in a commercial context, but we care. And of the latter group, there was this real, like, how do we get more people to show up to farmers markets? And how do we just get them to see this is the local produce and we need them to buy it? And to me, that is a great indicator of a mindset that's still waiting to break, because the worst place for a farmer to be is in a farmer's market. It is a waste of time. It's a Band-Aid business model that, at least around here, I'm sure there are different models, but I've actually been to a lot of farmers markets around the world. They're doing it because the mainstream supermarkets don't carry their stuff. And so if they want to get it to market, they have to go build their own market. But it means they're not on the farm. They're not doing the thing they're great at. They're standing there. If it rains, fewer people come. People think it's expensive. It's seen as elitist. So it's like the worst of all worlds for the farmer. So we were tossing around, what does it look like when that farmer's job is easier, not harder? Because he's working, I don't know, he's working way harder than the commercial farmer who gets the business model in a box from the big ag guys. They sell the seed, they sell the inputs to keep the seed alive and nothing else, and they buy the crop, guaranteed. That is an easy business model, push button, right? Hard to argue. And if you're a farmer who's like, I know I could do that and I'd make a lot more money, but I know it's not right. All the systems are against those folks. So what one of the people said was, oh, we just need to go on your farms more and learn more from you. And I'm thinking, no, leave the farmers alone. Stop taking Instagram pictures and asking for farm tours. Organize in ways that enable their excellent products to get to market. And I don't know exactly what that is. It's going to be very different for different products in different regions. But it isn't take up more of the farmer's time to educate people who don't understand how food is produced. So I think my counter to you, Carrie, is I think there is a lot of this going on, and it doesn't need to be showcased. We don't need more farmers featured. And that may not be what you're pointing out. So I'm just hitting a sore spot where people are saying in the meeting last night, they're like, we need to get you guys on Instagram and on Facebook. And I'm thinking they don't need social media coverage. They need incentives that don't punish them for doing a good job. And if people notice, that's great. But as long as they have to also be salespeople, PR folks, and they're not tending their soil. They're not stewarding their critters and noticing what grew well in the lower field versus the upper woods. So I just want to make a call for really noting what is ours to do. If we are in right relationship with producers who are doing it well, what can we do to make their lives easier? without needing to take more of their time to interview them more, to bring them into stakeholder conversations and take all the time. Because that's where I see a lot of activities like, let's round them all up and get them to talk. And it's like, oh, for God's sake, they're very, very busy. Anyways, that's a bit of a rant. Randy, save me, jump in.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I really appreciate all the contributions and insights. I mean, it's a very familiar conversation and group of actors, but there's always so much to discuss and to unpack newly as we gain more insight and go deeper down the rabbit hole, I should say. The thing that struck me, I was already sort of thinking about it, then I saw Sarah's comment in the chat just about the need to connect with others. And I think like as let's call ourselves disruptive innovators, there's one of two theories of change we subscribe to if we're to simplify things for a moment. Either we're accepting collapse and the whole system dismantling itself because it becomes so defunct that it no longer can exist in its current form. And we're building towards what the next system looks like when we have a clear plane on which we can rebuild and redesign. Or we're curious about the hospicing and transition to a new system in advance of that moment, and perhaps experimenting and learning now about how things could be and need to be for that future, and potentially making some meaningful change in the interim before everything goes to shit, so to speak. And I think the point that Sarah makes here about kind of needing to connect with those who are doing wrong, or at least understanding and learning from them, for me at least, is essential. Because I think we can speak principally and with grand designs conceptually about the way things could be in our complex world, but without any real experience functioning that way, there's only so much value we can place on that insight. And then further, I think there's so much we can learn in line with that interest in a far future by working inside of the current system, understanding the dysfunction and what stands in the way of making meaningful progress. And for me, I mean, I certainly subscribe to the theory of change, or let's say the raison d'etre of trying to use the runway we have left before the system completely collapses to learn about how things could be in practice for the future by working with those who are ready and interested in leading. And I think for me, the most complex aspect of things is how we make an appeal that is connected to those that are mandated within the current system. And I think it's absolutely possible to make meaningful change inside of the current system. It just means we have to adapt our narratives and begin to understand very deeply the constraints and the challenges that come with the way practice is, and then building innovatively the ways of demonstrating that systemic practices and ones that are science aligned can actually be enabling of better outcomes. And I don't think it's a straight jump from here's current practice, here's a way of practicing that aligns with planetary boundaries and social foundations and what we understand of functioning bioregions. But there's an incremental pathway of many transformational changes along a long transition that gets us there. And I think part of the challenge I see is so many of us are mired in, like, we know how it needs to be principally and as a concept, and we're just going to stand over here. And to the points that have been made earlier, just look at everything that's wrong and call it wrong and be insightful and justified in our position, and not really concern ourselves with what it takes to transition and engage in the complexity.
Yeah. Yep. Randy, one thing I particularly appreciate about your input is that I know from collaboration with you that you actually have case examples that demonstrate this. In particular, the case example that we use most often of the city of Nanaimo, and this does, I'm bringing this up because it does circle back to what's on the tin for this session, which is materiality. And the city of Nanaimo example is one where they had an intention to align their impact with the donut. And so they followed the Donut Economics Action Lab's guidance. And what they found was that the guidance didn't actually include any guidance on how to actually measure their impact vis-a-vis these sustainability thresholds, these ecological ceilings and social thresholds. And so they came to Randy, having heard that Randy was pursuing a context-based sustainability, which most of you know what that means, but essentially an approach that was not treating these sustainability thresholds as metaphorical or graphical realities, but as literal physical and social realities that one could measure, and with degrees of precision, or at least with robust methodological approaches. And so that one of the steps in applying that is a materiality step. And here's where I think there's something that's really sort of important. The materiality step has a scope step at the beginning. And so with a municipal context, there's a key scope question that's largely invisible unless you do a sort of a disciplined materiality process, which is, are you talking about the municipality as in the corporate entity that employs the mayor and the snowplow drivers, et cetera, and so therefore is the scope the municipality's buildings and their snowplows and et cetera, or are you talking about the scope of the entire community that is bounded within the borders of the bioregion? And those are two distinctly different things, and measuring the sustainability of those two different things comes with profoundly different implications measurement wise. And so I think I'm just listing this as this is one relatively small example of where a disciplined approach to materiality, and in particular, this is following the context-based approach to materiality, that very consciously sets scope, which is important because sustainability impacts have a nested or fractal reality to them. In other words, impacts that happen on a smaller level can aggregate up. They can seem small at an individual level or at a smaller scale level, but they aggregate up to have a multiplier effect at the larger level. So this is just, I'm sort of talking this through because I think this is an example of where materiality matters.
Mm-hmm. While you were both talking, I was just reminded by one of the things that I liked so much about context-based materiality, and that is the reminder, really, why do we as an organization have the right to exist and continue to exist on the one hand, and on the other hand, that necessary mindset shift from just stakeholders to the acceptance of rights holders. Because it also follows the idea that areas of impact do exist if you are outside of your carrying capacity or outside of your caring capacity, to use those both terms, because that means that you have duties and obligations that you owe. And by that, it is very clear what's material. And it's not a subjective exercise of, first, we, the organization, think what's material, and then B, we have some sort of artificial meeting with who we think our stakeholders are. And then we all nod our heads and say, okay, now we know what's material. So the subjectivity on the one hand and the objectivity on the other hand are two different qualities that the context-based materiality or triple materiality aspect, or the recognition of sustainability context, brings to the table. And I've facilitated so many stakeholder dialogues and stopped doing that because of the ridiculousness of these processes. And why is that? Again, think about the GRI content principles: sustainability, context, materiality, stakeholder inclusiveness, and completeness. And due to the lack of sustainability context recognition, the pendulum always swung just to, oh, materiality, that's the company to define, and the stakeholders to nod their heads to. The problem is that the stakeholders have the same problem as the organization. They lack the information about the context as well. So how can you imagine any useful conversation when you have organizations or representatives of organizations that don't speak eye to eye? And that was always the case due to the denial of sustainability context. So I just wanted to bring in that mindset of rights holdership as such an important concept to the idea of context-based materiality and triple materiality, as we call it, as an extension of double materiality. And that, I think, when you look at the example of Nanaimo, when you look at place-based ways to deal with materiality as well, this idea of rights holdership is so much more grabbable, so much more visible as well, that you cannot unsee it. So from that perspective, I'm banking a lot of hope on the place-based approaches to context-based materiality.
Love it. Thanks, Ralph. I've got some thoughts, but I'm very keen to hear what Glenn has to say. Please take the floor, Glenn.
Yeah, thanks, Lorraine. I'm going to give a slightly different perspective. I've worked 25 years in China. 30 years ago to now, China has been able to bring 300 million people out of poverty. And believe me, it is grind, soul-destroying poverty that we're talking about. When I had chats with the mayor of Shanghai in 2000, we talked about high-speed rail. There were no kilometers of high-speed rail in China, none. This year, there will be 50,000 kilometers. We have been able to build the entire infrastructure, tracks, trains, power, cables, communications, training people, training engineers, all of that. So looking outside of, shall we say, the top-down white colonial idea, there are other places in the world that are moving things on. I've also been involved in the Belt and Road Initiative, and that's perhaps less successful, so I won't make too many comments about that. But I don't want people to get the idea of being very negative and down on what we're talking about, getting into the details of all this. There are huge changes we've seen in China, huge changes that are coming in India, again, raising poverty levels, education, healthcare, food, etc. I've become more and more focused, though, on looking at how to reduce the evil outside by looking at the reducing the evil inside of myself with more meditation and more understanding of how I am contributing to the evil outside. And I'm spending the next several months doing meditations and elders courses with indigenous populations to try to resolve some of my own internal issues. Looking at the faces of people on the screen, you've got at least 20 or 30 years ahead of you to get up to me. And I'm not doing so well, so I'll just leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you, Glenn. It feels like exponentially beautiful to imagine you spending time with elders because of the wisdom and sharing you've given to so many of us over the years. It's like it just gets better. Thank you also for the reminder to look beyond where we might typically look. And I'm actually going to pick up on something Sarah said in the chat, and it relates to that. And then maybe by way of kind of keeping us to the time, we'll wrap at the half hour. I'll also just, before I say what I'd like to say, just preface, please load your thoughts if there's things you want to get onto the recording, either in the chat or you'd like to put your hand up and share something you want folks to know about, a question, an invitation, a call to action. This is an open space, so please have at us collectively. But something Sarah said, and by the way, Sarah's a dear friend. We connect a fair bit. So Sarah, if you're listening to the replay, I know you'll take this in the spirit intended, and I deeply appreciate our sparring. I want to remind us how much is going on in each of our lives that we don't see, neither in this Zoom call nor on our timelines. And so I want to just honor the many conversations that I'm quite sure are happening that I have no clue about between you and people who don't agree with you, the provocations and challenging situations you're finding yourself in. I'll honor the ones I'm finding myself in that I'm not particularly public about. And so this is me gently countering Sarah's note that we need to talk with people who don't agree with us and to say, we are, but that's not what's in here. So just to be really open to seeing what we can't see. China, decades of progress that gets bypassed by most of the kind of modern Western world. And a universe of capacity that is invisible and maybe always will be. My default goes to Brazil, where I have a lot of context and relationships and history. And I'm always amazed when I'm there and or connecting with folks in Brazil, what a universe it is that is just completely missed, which is normal. It is normal that we don't all understand each other's universes. So I just want to offer the counter that, and we are doing that, and we keep doing our best to widen and challenge and be provoked while also enjoying good company with folks who have a fair bit of alignment. And then I guess the last thing I wanted to say, and I'm just in total contrarian mode, so thank you for humoring me, because I'm also going to argue, Bill and Ralph, although you know that I love you guys and I'm glad we're having this conversation, I want to put in a little argument for an undisciplined approach to materiality, along with a disciplined one, because I believe there is great power in what we've all been doing, and yet we recognize, but it hasn't worked, right? Or it hasn't worked well enough. So even though the materiality that I put out there sounds the same, it's indistinguishable to the Anglophone ear, but the spelling puts reality in there. Really, that's where the similarity ends, because I would offer that anybody who really goes into the materiality trenches as I propose them, and I'll drop the link in again in case anybody wants to check that out, is all about you finding your role in creating the economy that serves life. And that's going to be very different if you're inside a company, if you're at an NGO, if you're a grandparent or a 20-something heading into university or becoming a plumber. It's unique for everyone. I have my bias for where it's most practical, but I just want to throw the doors wide open and say, there isn't really a process, or there isn't really a process. There are processes and pathways and interconnections and intersections and departures for an undisciplined approach to how each of us finds our potential and our most lovable capacities in creating industry that really only serves life. That's all it does. We're very far from that. I think we're a couple generations. I don't expect, in spite of Glenn, I love that I might have a couple more decades, and yet I don't expect this work to be even largely underway, even if I live out to my statistically likely lifespan. So with that awareness, I ask myself, and I invite you to consider, what is your role within the frameworks that exist, within the context that exists, within all the handy tools we can tuck in our pocket, and then dump them all on the floor, have a tantrum, go for a swim, roll in the snow, whatever works, and then see what's there. Because the chances of it coming from a carefully constructed path by other people feels slim to me. So I just throw that out there to stir things up, much as I also deeply appreciate the discipline, and I once in a while I behave in a disciplined manner, but I had a little blip there. So yeah, with that, I want to just open up. If anybody at all want, Bill, you're off mute, Ralph, go for it. And then please others chime in. I'll drop a couple links here to follow up on what I'm saying. I'll put a link to Materiality and a other fun thing I got coming up. Take it away.
Yeah, maybe I'll start. And I just want to use the opportunity to also, because you were talking about all these different entry points in which we need to connect to people. And my angriness about the failure of the corporate world doesn't mean that the door is closed to the corporate world. It's not. It's just an ongoing invitation, and sometimes it just needs harsh words. But I'm totally in peace with that. The way how we as an organization have reacted to going through that process of becoming collapse aware and redefining our own strategy towards collapse resilience is that we're offering many different entry points to be connected with the work that we do. Three pillars stand out to that. One is that we're acting more and more in convenings. We have a lot of these open dialogues. We have our conference this year connected to so-called confluences, so that people can organize their own confluence on the ground, screening the conference, and then discuss place-based what they heard really then also relates to them and their own bioregion and their own experience and their own place. With a feedback day for them, and then also going into the months after into various continental conference gatherings. It's just one opening to all over the world, to all of those that are organized in bioregions, but also to all of those that are not organized in bioregions, and those that are just curious and just want to bring a couple of people together in their living room. Go for it. We're all with you. So we want to really create that community. And then when it comes to what we're good at, and that is sort of creating knowledge commons, there's much more the need to do that. And Bill always, and I think he's adapting language that he also learned, the idea of two-eyed knowledge commons. That means none of this is us. We're helping to structure whatever context is necessary and put that into designs and formats that are necessary for bioregions to thrive and bioregions to weave with each other. And all of that, there's an underlying, or whatever, maybe underlying is the wrong word, but a theme that really goes with that, and that is, how do you organize all that? How do you create governance? And what forms of self-governance are enabling that sort of weaving? And also, last sentence here, are potentially helping people to understand that the corporation as the highest level of ways of organizing people is the best possible thing, or to understand that politics as we have them right now is possibly impotent to solve any of the problems that we have to solve together, or the idea that nation states artificially, with artificial boundaries, are against the idea of bioregional organization. And all of that is that sort of seed setting the seeds or planting the seeds that a different economic thinking might be enabled over time. And that leads to all of these other thinkings, like what sort of currencies do we need? How do we create membranes between bioregions? How do we create principles? How trade within and of bioregions can actually happen? All of that can be nurtured, I think, by the starting point that we're trying to offer with these three pillars. And then, of course, also to acknowledge that so much is already thought through. So much was already there. So much indigenous wisdom that is already available, that is disconnected to that arrogance of our economic system thinking. So bringing that together is necessary. So I'm closing here because I think there are so many openings now for people to grab and to be involved. And it's that makes me a very, very happy person, even though we're in collapse. I know that is coming, but we have to create those islands of coherence. And that's where my full focus now lies. It's not the corporate report anymore.
I'll piggyback on what Ralph is saying, just with one sort of maybe shameless plug, I guess, or at least just so people are aware of the availability of it. So Lorraine has mentioned her Materiality sessions. And so I want to totally support those. In particular, as I mentioned earlier, what I appreciate about that is the from one's own lens. And Lorraine, I appreciate you pointing to like the end goal of the process as you've laid it out is, what can I, as an individual who's doing this assessment, what can I do in this circumstance? So I definitely want to point people in that direction. If folks are in a context where doing a more traditional, through the lens of the company itself, then our SDPI training, and I put the link in the sidebar, is essentially the only place to get a deep dive on context-based sustainability or materiality and triple materiality. You can sort of read all of this from the UNSDPI website on the UNRISD website, but not get sort of like a full throttle or well-rounded approach to it. So that said, I'm just making that information available. This is a very soft pitch, no expectations of folks, but that is where you could take a deeper dive. And I see we're right about at time. I just want to thank Lorraine. I imagine you'll have a few words at the end, but I want to thank you. Lorraine literally just reached out over WhatsApp and said, hey, can we bat around some ideas? And this is the idea for this is what emerged from that. So Lorraine, I really appreciate you as both a colleague and a dear friend. So thank you for playing with us here.
Well, thank you, Bill, and thanks for fielding my little lob over the net. It maybe comes from a place of like, sometimes it's kind of lonely and confusing, and it's really great to talk with you guys, with all of you. And Bill and Ralph, you've been such generous colleagues and friends, certainly to me, but I know to hundreds more who aren't here. So it's a treat. And so really just in the spirit of keeping us on time, if anybody else has something to invite folks to or let people know about, don't be shy, drop it into the chat. Take your time to click in what's there so you get the UNRISD goodies and all the others. And this is recorded. I will make a point of making the recording available on LinkedIn. I do know how to post things on LinkedIn, even if I don't know how to host a live chat. That'll be my next adaptation as I go learning. And meanwhile, just in closing, much gratitude for all of your time and energy and attention, and a repeated invitation to look for what calls you towards where you would like to be. What feels good? What feels right relationship in all the connections? And what can you do to create more of that? I feel like that's the short to-do list these days, and it feels good. And I agree wholeheartedly with Glenn. So much of it is an inside job, so we've got that to do as well. Much love and respect. Great weekends for those who observe weekends, and looking forward to keeping in touch and walking alongside. Thank you very much. On we go.
Thank you.
Bye
Bye.
for now,
Thanks,
folks.
everyone. Take care.
Yeah, good to see you guys.
Thank you.
I'll keep the line
Thank
open
you.
so you can click on things.
You may want to stop the recording.
Doing that right now. Although maybe someone will say something really juicy. Quick, what's the line? I'm stopping the recording. We're not going to know.
Yeah.